Hey you guys, what I'm going to go over with you today for writing is the format of your literary essay. Mrs. Katzowitz and I have been a little bit concerned about some of the essays that we've been seeing because it's not following the format. We are going to be doing a lot of these literary essays, so it's extremely important that you know and understand the format of how to write it. First things first, a literary essay must have 5 separate paragraphs. 5 separate paragraphs. The first paragraph is going to be your introduction. Within the introduction, you must have the title of the story. So if you see here, in the first line, it says that in Charlotte's Web, the writer mentions the title of the story. It must include the author's name. So they say, by E.B. White. So right away, they tell you the name of the book and the author. Perfect. It must also contain your thesis statement. This is your claim, or as we have been calling it, the theme of the story. You can see here, towards the end of the paragraph, it says that the author shows that a real friend will help you even if he or she has nothing to gain from doing so. That's the writer's thesis in this story. As you can see that the introduction is its own paragraph. Now if we move on to the second paragraph, you're going to notice that this is where you're going to put in your evidence. Your evidence has to back up your thesis. So I'm looking here at my second paragraph, and I'm going to look to make sure that the evidence that I used backs up my thesis. So throughout the book, Charlotte is always willing to help Wilbur. She spins words into her web to save Wilbur's life, even though spinning the words, is tiring and difficult for her. Does that back up being a good friend? Yes. Does Charlotte have anything to gain from helping Wilbur? No. It's hard for her, and she's tired. So yeah, does that back up my thesis? Absolutely. Do you notice how that this piece of evidence here is a separate paragraph? Yours needs to be so too. Then I'm going to move on to my third paragraph. I'm going to put in yet another piece of evidence. Ideally, when I'm finding my evidence for my story, I would like to find evidence from the beginning of the story, the middle, and then towards the end. So let's see if the writer did a good job finding another piece of evidence to back up their thesis. Templeton the rat, on the other hand, is not a real friend to Wilbur. So here the writer is doing something that's very interesting. They're finding an example of what it means to not be a good friend. Would that back up my thesis? Yes, because we want to know what it means to be a good friend without having to gain anything from being a good friend. So that was a great piece of evidence. Do you notice how it's a separate paragraph? You have to make sure that you're making a separate paragraph for every piece of evidence that you're providing. Let's move on now to my fourth paragraph, where I'm going to put in my final piece of evidence from the end of my story. And this is where I am here. Do you notice that the writer uses a transition phrase? They say, at the end of the book. They use this so that the reader knows, well, that we're at the end of the book. And it's a great way to be able to provide your evidence from the end of the book. So Wilbur shows that he has learned the true meaning of friendship. He helps Charlotte by taking her egg sack back to the barn where he knows her babies will be safe. He does this deed not for selfish reasons, but for the concern for his friend. That's a great example because, again, the writer is showing what it means to be a good friend and how they're just doing it because they like being their friend and they're not trying to gain anything from it. Do you see how every piece of evidence that we have used has backed up my thesis? Very important. And now we move on to my last paragraph, my conclusion. And for some reason, a lot of you get hung up on it. First of all, do you notice that my conclusion is a separate paragraph? It is. But you guys get hung up on it for some reason. And a conclusion is actually very simple. All you have to do is retell me the name of the book, you put in your thesis again, and then you give me your final thought. It's your personal thought about the thesis that you came up with in the beginning of the story. So if we look at the example that's here, it says, in Charlotte's Web, the author shows us that a real friend will help you even if he or she has nothing to gain from doing so. Do you notice here how the writer, all they did was put in the name of the book and their thesis again? Pretty simple. And then they give their final thought. Reading this book made me realize how important it is to help others. Being a good friend means being there when you are needed. So all they did was just give their own personal opinion, their own thought about what it means to be a good friend. When you look back at your literary essay, you should notice that you have a total of 5 paragraphs. And each paragraph has something specific in it. My first paragraph here has my introduction with the book, the author, and my thesis. My second paragraph contains my first piece of parallel evidence that backs up my thesis. It supports it. It proves it. My third paragraph gives me another piece of evidence that backs up my thesis, again, proving my thesis to be correct. My fourth paragraph is my final piece of evidence that backs up my thesis, again, proving my thesis, giving it some legs, supporting it. And then my final paragraph, my fifth and final paragraph, is my conclusion. I simply just restate my book, my thesis, and I give my final thought on it. Today I want you to go back. I want you to look at your literary essay. I want you to make sure you have 5 paragraphs. I want you to make sure that your paragraphs fit this format that's next to me. If it's not correct, I want you to rewrite it. If it is correct, you're going to be coming back with me for a little bit further instruction. But you need to know this format. You need to have it memorized, because we are going to be doing literary essays all year, and you're not going to get videos like this. At some point, you're just going to be given a question, or we may say, on the last book you read, write a literary essay. You need to know the format. Good luck. Look forward to reading your perfect 5-paragraph essays.